Welcome to the Run for God Run Club, where you will find God in a runner's space.
Welcome to the Run for God Run Club. This is your one stop each week to be motivated and inspired to get off the couch and onto the running trail, where you can in turn inspire others to do the same. Let's learn, laugh, and leap into running together, giving God the glory for what we are able to do in His name. Amen. I am your running host, Dean Thompson, and as always, I am joined by Run for God founder Mitchell Hollis. This week, we're changing things up a bit, but we have something exciting to share, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to do something similar to what we did a couple of weeks ago when we had Ryan Hall and we interviewed him and did some things. Well, we've interviewed Dean Karnazes, or Karnazes, I think is the proper way to say his name. And we're going to share that video.
Yeah.
That's a crazy guy.
Deanie's fascinating. His book, Ultramarathon Man, was probably one of the first running books that I ever read. And to read the stories about him of carrying pizzas while he's running to eat, and just, I love hardcore stuff anyway. So he's just a fascinating guy. I think everybody's going to love this interview.
Yeah. We talk about ultramarathon, and for us, we've been around ultramarathon a long time. For me, I've been around ultramarathon for a very long time. We take that word and we think, well, everybody knows what ultramarathon is, but I don't think everybody understands what an ultramarathon is. So
I don't think they do. I mean, an ultramarathon is technically anything over 26.2 miles is technically an ultramarathon. But don't let that fool you, because for Dean, that's a Sunday walk in the park. This guy's ran over, right at 350 miles at one time without sleeping. So that's the ultra of the ultra marathons. That's the crazy people. Let's just say that.
That's it. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. Do you think it's good for us, all that running?
I think the verdict's out on that. I don't know. You see studies both ways, and I think that's one of those questions that I never get answered. I think it's very individual, probably. Yeah,
I think you're right. If you read the book Born to Run, he makes a pretty good case in there that technically we were designed right, to be able to run long distances. As human beings, it's kind of our purpose. One of the things that we'll learn is that in certain cases, runners are faster than horses.
Right.
Or people that are faster than horses.
Yeah, in the ancient days, that
was a big deal.
We were used to be a courier instead of a horse because we were faster, which boggles my mind, and I never knew that until this interview.
The history of the ultramarathon is a relatively new thing. Mm-hmm. The first Olympic marathon was run in 1896. Prior to that, there were some longer races, but it wasn't really an official thing until 1896. And then, and they only did that because they were having the Olympic Games, and they wanted something that kind of really signified what the Olympic Games were about. And that's how the marathon was born. Only men ran that marathon, and only men ran the marathon for a very long time. Ultra marathons are actually newer than the marathon is, and so they keep getting crazier, and they keep getting longer, and they keep getting harder, and people. It used to be, I remember back when I was a kid, when I was in high school, my coach was an ultramarathoner. And so I went to these races, and sometimes I would be part of his support crew. And so this was way back in the late 70s, early 80s, when ultramarathon, people didn't even know what the word meant, because that was just for people that are just off their rocker. And so I learned about it very early. But most of the people that were participating back then they were probably marathoners that were okay at marathon, and they decided, let's try to go a little longer. Now, ultramarathons are bringing in some serious, hardcore, fantastic athletes. And so a lot of those times over the past 20 years have come way down for things like the 50-mile run and things like that, because more people have realized people who are better athletes have gotten into ultramarathoning.
Well, and I think it's, back when it first started, I'm sure, even in recent history, it was kind of a dare. It was kind of you've lost your marbles. I can't believe you're going to go run 50 miles. To now, people actually train for that. You know, Dean trains for those. People like Scott Urich and these ultra runner guys, that's their living. That's what they train for, and that's what they do. And so, yeah, they've put their focus. It's no longer a dare or guys sitting around drinking a cup of coffee saying, I can run further than you, to where it's turned into an actual sport.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to hear those people. I think you and I have actually done one or two ultra distance runs, and I personally do not like it. It's too much, it's too far, and it hurts too much. But there's a huge audience for it. People love. You either love to run long and slow, or you like to run short and fast. I'm the long and slow, but not that long. Not that long.
Got a limit.
Yeah.
Got a limit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's we're again, I mentioned that it's a fairly new phenomenon, and the marathon even didn't become really popular until really late after the 80s. One of the things that I knew that I've learned over the years is that the fastest overall Boston Marathon was run in 1983. Not the fastest winning time, but the 100th place finisher in 1983 ran about 2 hours and 21 minutes. Well, today the 100th place finisher runs about 2:35. That's a big difference, and for some people that doesn't seem like much, but that 14 minutes is huge. And so, but what has happened is, and this is the cool thing about our sport, is that so many people have realized they can do those things. That average marathon times have gotten slower because people who are slower have realized I can do that, and it's an accomplishment for them. And I think that's kind of a neat thing, and the ultramarathon is now becoming that as well. There was a day when you would start off an ultra race. I remember the Strolling Jim 40 miler up in Wartrace, Tennessee. I mean, that's out in the middle of nowhere. Crazy run over these terribly difficult hills, and you could fit everybody basically shoulder to shoulder across the road, the whole field. Today, there's probably hundreds that start that race.
But why do you think that is? Why is it in our DNA, in runners' DNA, it's not good enough just to do a 5K. As soon as we get done with that first 5K, if you've done the 5K challenge, what did you think the minute you crossed the finish line? What's next?
All right.
And I do the 10K, then I do the 13.1, then I do the 26.2. Oh, there's a 50K. You know, this was the same song and dance it was with me when I first started running. That's kind of how running became an idol to me. It's because I was always looking for that next thing. Why is that?
Yeah, I just think I think we like to get something done. I don't think it's any different than, chopping a bunch of wood. When you get through, you love to look back at that pile and go, look what I did. When you wash your car, it's a little thing, but you get through and you stand back, you look at it and go, I did that. Yeah. I mean, anything we can do and accomplish, I think we just like to look back. And the bigger that thing is, the bigger the smile and the more joy there is to it a lot of times.
Yeah, I think you're right. And before we get to the interview, I just want to say thank you to Dean Karnazes for doing this. It's, I'm really learning about in the process of reaching out to these people that the running community is so giving. I mean, Dean did not have to do this interview. He did not have to agree to come in and talk to our listeners, but just like Ryan, he was so willing to do that, and hopefully the other ones that we're reaching out to will be the same way. But Dean, if you're listening, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good guy. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. We're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna play the video. We're gonna play the first half of the interview between Mitchell and Dean, and then we'll come back. We'll have one more commercial break, and then we'll start over again, and we'll talk about and break down some of the things that Dean says. First, though, our main sponsor is the world's greatest digital media platform, J Radio.
You know that moment when you're running and you settle into that perfect pace, and then the next song comes on? Don't let that happen again. With the new J Radio, you can trust us to make sure that the next song in your playlist will help you keep up that pace.
Here we go.
Check out the Radioactive station on J Radio for all different genres of workout music handpicked for you while you run. Start listening now at jradio.com.
On the night of my 30th birthday, I went to a bar to meet with some friends to celebrate my 30th birthday as in a way that a lot of people celebrate their 30th birthday. We get very drunk. So at midnight, I told them I was leaving, and they said, well, hold it. It's your 30th birthday. Let's have another round of tequila to celebrate. And I said, no, guys, instead of having another round of tequila, I'm going to run 30 miles to celebrate my 30th birthday. And they looked at me and they said, but you're not a runner. You're drunk. And I said, I am, but I'm still going to do it. So I walked out of the bar. I didn't even own running gear at the time, but thankfully I had these comfortable jockey underwear on, these kind of silk underwear. Yeah. So I took off my pants and just started running south, drunk at midnight with the intent of running 30 miles. And that night forever changed the course of my life.
Wow. So you had a professional job at the time, from what I understand. And so you decided, was it that night that you basically decided that you were going to become a professional runner?
I pretty much did. It was 2 a.m. Yeah, I'd have to put you there. It was 2 a.m. I'd run about 15 miles, and now I'd sobered up. So the alcohol had worn off, and it got real. The pain set in, the suffering, the kind of what the heck am I doing out here kind of thing. But it just felt right. The stars were out, and I was on a quiet backcountry road all by myself, and the mist was on my skin, and I could smell the eucalyptus of the trees, and I just thought, this is where I belong. This is my place, and this is how you have to make the rest of your life. And so that night, it pretty much set the seed, that I was going to become a runner somehow.
Wow. So we all know that can be done now, but back in those days, ultra marathoners there wasn't a big group of you guys back then. So what gave you the courage to ultimately quit your job, a great job from what I understand, and become a professional runner? What did your family think about that?
You're right. Back when I did this, you didn't do these kind of things. I mean, there was no gig economy. There was no, easy way to break off on your own. And when I did it, it was, quite shocking. And, what gave me the courage? I think that night of drunken running, I could see myself at 50. And I thought, when you turn 50, you're going to be, successful business guy, overweight, bald, with a red sports car on, maybe your second wife. Is that the life you want? It was I saw this script on the wall. Do you want to hang out in bars in San Francisco? Or you really want to follow your passion? So I thought, it's better to fail, and at least to look back when I turned 50 and say, well, I tried my best and I just couldn't pull it off. It'd be better to say that than I wish I would have tried. And you have to understand my wife, because when I told her, here I am, we've got a child on the way, our first child. I've got health care, I've got stock options, I've got a company car, I've got a solid paycheck coming in. And, I told her I was going to quit my job. And she looked at me and she said, I wonder what took you so long.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. Sounds like you married up kind of like I did. I had a very similar experience when we started Run for God. I basically went to my wife and said, hey, I think I need to quit my job and pursue this. So it's a scary thing, but it's a very rewarding thing. And, it looks like obviously things have worked out for you. I'm going to go through a few of your of accomplishments. Like I said, many of our viewers are new to the sport of running, and I want to get them a little bit more familiar with some of your accomplishments. You ran 350 miles in 80 hours and 44 minutes with no sleep. You ran a 200-mile relay solo 11 different times. You ran a marathon at the South Pole, 50 marathons, 50 states in 50 days. and you've also ran 148 miles on a treadmill. You know, I actually ran 50 miles on a treadmill one time, and I think I swore I would never get on one again. But out of those accomplishments, we're going to get to some of your other accomplishments here in just a minute. But out of those accomplishments, which one sticks out the most to you?
Oh, you know, that's an easy question to answer. You know, I've run, like you said, I've run on all 7 continents of Earth twice now.
Wow.
You know, in some of the most remote, you know, exotic places on Earth. And my favorite race was just a ho-hum 10K. And, you know, you're probably wondering, this is a guy who runs hundreds of miles across the desert, you know, where was the appeal in a 10K? Well, I ran a 10K with my daughter, Alexandria, on her 10th birthday.
Oh, wow.
So to me, that was just, nothing can ever top that. That was the pinnacle moment of my career.
Wow. Well, you've also done a few others, and these are the ones, one of them you talk about a lot, but one of them you don't really talk about a lot. But a few of the accomplishments that I would like to focus on that really make me sit back in my chair, as if the other ones don't, are the ones that we don't hear as much about. And one of them is the Badwater Ultramarathon. Now, for a guy that runs 350 miles, this one's only 135 miles. So compared to your other events, it's fairly short. But walk us through that event. For our listeners who don't know what that race is, that is quite the accomplishment. Not only did you do it 10 times, but you won it one time. Walk everybody through what that race looks like and, more importantly, feels like.
Well, I'll start off by saying that I never claimed that I won the race. I claimed that I escaped the fastest.
Yeah.
Because, you know, survived the fastest. What the Badwater Ultramarathon is a 135-mile foot race from the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, which is Badwater, to the highest point in the contiguous U.S., which is Mount Whitney. And the idea is to run continuous from the lowest point to the highest point. And in between the two is this place called Death Valley. And they hold the race in the middle of summer, and it tends to get a little warm in Death Valley. Like, it'll melt your shoes warm in Death Valley. You know, in a couple of years I've run it. It's been over 130 degrees. I'll never forget one year I ran it, and we got to a place called Stovepipe Wells in the middle of the night, and the low temperature at 2 a.m. was 114. That was the low.
Wow.
You know, but it's a dry heat. It's not like Georgia.
Yeah.
But it's
still 130
you know,
degrees.
It's probably the most you know, removed from Earth. The closest you can get to hell with actually being on Earth, it's got to be that place, because it's a furnace. It's literally a furnace. I mean, you run past places called Dante's Peak, you know, Furnace Creek, Stovepipe Wells. The list goes on, you know, the Devil's Golf Course. And actually, if you look in the background here, this is the dunes of Death Valley. You run right past, and you can see that, let's see here, that peak up right about there.
Yeah.
You know, that's approaching toward Mount Whitney, where you end up. So just imagine getting from, you know, where I'm at, which is not even halfway there, up to the top of that mountain.
Wow. Now, I've seen pictures where you're running on the white line, and that's because your shoes at certain parts of the day in the course, your shoes will actually melt, won't they?
They do, and that's why you stay on the white line. You know, the pavement can be over 200 degrees. So I learned the hard way. The first year I tried to run because I didn't make it the first year, but I had my shoes, my foot just kind of slipped out from my shoe, and I thought, you know, what's going on here? And there's a big smudge mark in the asphalt, and I realized my bottom of my shoe had melted off. So it was pretty intimidating conditions, I would say.
So how many pairs of shoes will you go through during that race? I guess you change shoes a lot.
Yeah, you do. It's helpful to change shoes. I mean, a couple tricks, you know, I've learned, quote unquote, tricks to get through this race is one trick is to rotate shoes and to have your crew, because you have a crew that kind of supports you along the way, to have your crew put the shoes that you're not wearing in the ice chest to try to get them cold. And then you put on a cold pair, which lasts about 5 minutes before they're hot. and then you switch in and out to these two pairs of shoes. The other thing that's quite commonplace is you start to develop blisters. It's so hot, your feet you start to get what they call hot spots.
Right.
So you have a surgical scissors, and you basically just start cutting out pieces of shoe that your foot's being rubbed against. And it's not uncommon to see people running with shoes that look like sandals. You just literally cut away pieces of shoes, pieces of fabric, so you don't get a blister.
Wow. That's incredible. Now another run that you did, and I actually caught the tail end of this one, and I'll call this probably your modern day Forrest Gump moment, is when you ran from Disneyland to New York City. And before we get into that run, how many Forrest Gump jokes do you get throughout the run?
It's funny because I was doing this stuff before the movie came out.
Yeah.
And, and then the onslaught, it was, before that, it was people playing the Rocky Balboa theme song, or Chariots of Fire, da-na-na-na-na-na. But then out the window started coming, run, Forrest, run.
Yeah. So logistically, was that one of the hardest? Because I know there was a lot of production behind that one, because you actually ended at the Regis and Kelly show.
You're absolutely right. And the reason I started at Disneyland is because ABC, it's Disney owns ABC Television, and I was it was basically for a television show, Live with Regis and Kelly, that broadcast on ABC Television. So they had this big flashy start at Disneyland where literally, they closed down Disneyland so that I could run right through the middle of Disneyland. Right out the entrance and basically bang a right and head toward New York City. So it was quite an incredible start. The fireworks show went off. The Goodyear blimp flew overhead with "Good luck, Dean." And then I got out there on the road and realized, boy, I've got to run 40 to 50 miles a day for 75 days straight. It's not going to be that fun, actually. But that's why I started at Disneyland. You're right. Every day I was on Live with Regis and Kelly. Some days, I'd be the whole episode. Other days, it'd just be a brief update on my progress.
Wow. Yeah, it was quite the production. I think the day I caught it, for whatever reason, it was the very end, and that's quite a feat. Now, one of the runs that I really want to park on for just a minute, because I actually listened to a podcast sometime back. It was you were on Rich Roll?
Rich Roll, yeah.
You were doing a podcast with him, and it's the only book of yours that I have not read yet. And I actually ordered it yesterday, so I'm going to read this book. But you're talking about the road to Sparta, and you talk about, it's fascinating the amount of historical research you did in putting this book together and doing this run. But many of our listeners know or have heard the story of how the marathon came to be and how Phidippides ran, and then he died at the very end. But there's so much more to that story that I've heard you describe. Tell us a little bit about what you learned through the process of writing this book and running the Spartathlon that you didn't know before you started this process.
Yeah, well, I'll preface this by saying I'm 100% Greek. So the story of the marathon always interested me. And, the story that we typically hear is about this Greek hoplite Phidippides running from the battlefield of Marathon after the Greeks defeated the Persians, and running into the Acropolis in Athens and proclaiming Nike, Nike, or Nike, Nike, which means victory, victory, we are victorious. And then the story ends with him dying.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, that is where Nike, the footwear company, got their name.
Right.
It's from this endeavor. So we thought it was a 26.2 mile foot race, to 26.2 miles to get from the battlefield to Athens. And that's kind of whatever, has been left through the ages. But the backstory is much more colorful. I mean, it has to do with these long distance runners, this trained class of citizens in ancient Greece. So we're talking, 490 BC. And these guys, these runners, were trained to outrun a horse. The Greeks realized that in the mountainous terrain of southern Greece, that a fit human could outrun a horse. So they thought if they got invaded by another, like the Persians, who all rode horses, they could have their runners, run out and solicit help faster than these guys could cover the terrain on a horse. So when the Persians invaded at the Bay of Marathon, the Athenians realized they were badly outnumbered and they needed reinforcements. And if you've seen the movie 300, who's the most bad fighting force in ancient Greece? It's the Spartans. So they dispatched Phidippides to run from Athens to Sparta to recruit the Spartans in the battle. Now that's 153 miles. And this is 490 BC. So he's running, in leather sandals. He's eating figs. He's foraging food along the way. He's eating olives. He has probably some cured meat like beef jerky, and he's just drinking water. He probably has a bladder filled with water, and then he's filling it with water when he comes across a stream. He's also self-navigating. I mean, there's no GPS. There's no smartphone back then. There's no Google Maps. So he's figuring out just line of sight how to get to Sparta, and he's running straight through the night, and he's by himself. And he realized, this man knows that all of his Athenian brethren will be completely wiped out if he doesn't succeed in this ultramarathon. So he makes it to Sparta. He runs 153 miles. The Spartans agree that they will come and help battle off the Persians, but they said we can't leave for battle because there's not a full moon, and we are forbidden for leaving for battle until there's a full moon. That won't be for another 6 days. So now Phidippides is in a quandary. He's like, oh, great, the Spartans are coming, but they're going to be delayed for 6 days. I got to run back to Athens and tell the Athenians, the Spartans are coming. It's just going to take a little while. So he turns around the next day and runs 153 miles back to Athens. Well, when he gets there, the generals decide that they can't wait for the Spartans, that every day the Persians are reinforcing their place on the battlefield. So they attack and somehow defeat the Persians on their own. And then they dispatch him on that final mission to run from the battlefield to the Acropolis. So prior to running the marathon, he had actually run an ultramarathon of some distance.
That's insane. And from what I understand, that battle in Phidippides himself kind of changed the trajectory possibly of world history.
It did. I mean, that was I did a lot of historical research on this book. I worked with one of the foremost authorities on ancient Greek culture, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Paul Cartledge of Cambridge University. And, he was amazing in citing ancient references for me to look at and analyze. And to your point, if the Persians had prevailed, and this is pretty well known, this whole idea of democracy, or, the demos, the rule by the people, or the polis, that might not have become what it became, because, that was, the Greeks were experimenters with this idea of rule by the people, not rule by a central power figure. And Persia very much was ruled by a central power figure, Darius, and he was out to pretty much crush and rule and, take over Greece. And had he prevailed, that might, democracy might not have evolved the way it did.
Wow, that's incredible. So ever since that run out of that bar that night, it seems like your hunch to become a professional runner has paid off, and you're a best-selling author many times over. In 2006, you wrote the Ultramarathon Man, Confessions of an All-Night Runner. That was actually the first read that I read. I didn't start running until 2007. And so that was one of the first running books that I ever read. In 2009, you wrote 50-50, The Secrets I Learned by Running 50 Marathons in 50 States in 50 Days. And was that co-authored or written with Matt Fitzgerald?
Yeah, so that was, it was an adventure book about this crazy idea of running 50 marathons in all of the 50 states in 50 consecutive days. And I worked with a coach and a trainer I'm not a coach and a trainer, and Matt is. So I work with Matt to help. It's a prescriptive book. So not only are there, stories about the marathons I ran in each of the states, there's life lessons as well as there's practical lessons for running and training. And that's why I worked with Matt, because that's what he does for a living. He knows, how to write training plans, and how to coach someone. So he was invaluable in that regard.
Exactly. And then in 2011, you wrote Run, which is a story of 26.2 miles of blisters and bliss. I like that byline. And then obviously in 2016, you wrote The Road to Sparta, reliving the ancient battle and the epic run that inspired the world's greatest foot race. Looking back over your career, what has been your favorite project? And you described your favorite run a while ago, which was a 10K, but what has been your favorite project? Because you've worked on so many incredible projects. What would be your favorite?
And if you want to hear the remainder of that interview, come back next week and hear Mitchell Hollis finish his interview with the Ultramarathon Man, Dean Karnazes. See you next week.
There is power in people's stories.
It's a challenging time. What do you do when everything you believe about God is being tested and God doesn't look like the good father that he says he does?
You've got layers and layers and layers of hate in your heart. It takes God to clean it out.
Your story can help encourage others around the country, just like these stories have. You can walk through a simple process of sharing your story with the Big Share app. Download the Big Share app in your app store to start sharing hope with others.
Wow, crazy. That's what I would use to describe that man. He's definitely crazy.
Yeah, in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah.
He's such a great ambassador for our sport. The way he got started and all, it's interesting and all that. But as you mentioned before the break, you talked about how great it was that he would do this, that he would participate with us, and he doesn't have to do that, but he's just such a great ambassador. Yeah. I've seen him interact at places like at the Boston Marathon, the expos and things. He's just an engaging guy. And
he you can tell he lives it and breathes it. I was so tickled when I saw him come up on the Zoom camera. He had Death Valley, one of the virtual backgrounds, and he loves the sport, which is what makes him such a great ambassador. It's kind of like you. I mean, when you get to talking about either one of these deans about the sport of running, their whole countenance changes. Your countenance changes when you start talking about running, and it's infectious. Yeah. And that's the great thing about Dean Karnazes and Dean Thompson is they do a lot for the sport. They're just great ambassadors for the sport. So yeah, it's. I got so tickled. If you haven't watched the YouTube video, go watch it, because it's pretty hilarious that he popped up with a virtual background, and I thought he was going to pop up in some studio or something, and he pops up in Death Valley.
So the way he got started, he's at a bar. Yeah. He's doing things you do at a bar. Right. And then it's like this notion hits him, like, I think I'll just go out and run at midnight.
It's a Forrest Gump moment, isn't it? And I asked him, I don't know if that was in this part or the last part, but it's I asked him how many comments he gets made about Forrest Gump, but it's so true. He's sitting there probably having a good time. I don't know, may not have been having a good time. I didn't ask him, and then this thought comes across, I'm going to run to the next town over. And that kind of sounds like something I would do, probably. But you wonder what was inside his mind at that time. If you read Ultramarathon Man, he really dives a lot deeper into that night. There was a lot more circumstances going on than what he talked about in the interview. So if you haven't read Ultramarathon Man, go get that book. It's a great read. All his books are great. But yeah, it's funny to hear him just say, I think I'll go run 30 miles.
And then he makes this decision to change his life. He talked about, and again, the book does tell more detail. He was very successful. He's a little modest about it when you just talk to him, but he was very successful. Right. For him to give up what he got is, we talk about how materialistic this world is today, and he gave up a lot of materialism
Right.
to pursue what he pursued.
And I could be wrong, but I want to say he had an MBA.
You may be right.
I think I'm right about that. I think that's in the book. But yeah, I mean, he had a very good career, and just decided that, you know. And I think there's a lot of people out there that's where he was. You know, they're in their life, they feel like they're in this rut, and they're scared to make a change. That had to be scary to do what he did, just to say, I'm going to become a professional runner. I mean, how many people do that?
Nobody does it, and they certainly didn't do it then, and they certainly don't do it giving up what he had.
Right.
And
right.
So,
but he knew he had a passion, and he followed that.
Yep. And I like what he said. He said it was better to fail trying to do something he loved to do than to look back and say, I wish I would have tried.
Yeah.
So he was prepared for failure if it happened.
Right.
It didn't, but
he wasn't scared by failure.
Right.
He wasn't paralyzed of the failure.
Which is a great lesson for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, how many times do we not do things and think, you know, oh, what would have been? There's been country songs written about that. But yeah, I mean, I was just coming here, I was listening to a podcast, and it was Dave Ramsey, and he was talking about get out of your comfort zone. You know, we talk about this a lot with the sport of running. We've got a T-shirt that says find your comfort zone and leave it. But that's just kind of a ongoing theme we see with Ryan Hall or with Dean Karnazes or with both of our stories. It's all about, if you get comfortable and you stay comfortable, a piece of you dies.
Yeah.
And God doesn't want us to get comfortable and stay comfortable. He constantly wants us to keep pushing in our faith and reaching out to people that's not comfortable to do that. We're growing when we're getting outside our comfort zone. So there's so much to learn from what Dean said, not only from a physical and a sports standpoint, but in our walk with Christ. It's don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah, and I think that paralyzes a lot of us.
It does.
Because we think that failure is rejection, and rejection is an indictment on me. Right. And I think the Bible is clear. We're going to have some rejection, right? And that it's okay. And
we should expect rejection.
Yeah,
is what the Bible says. I mean, it says it's not if, it's when. It said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for my name's sake." Yep. Jesus was pretty clear when he said, pick up your cross daily. Picking up the cross, we tend to glance over that, but that's not a pretty picture.
No.
If you've seen any of the movies or read about what that actually meant, that was Jesus going to his death.
Yeah.
And basically that's Jesus telling us, die to yourself and follow me. And it's not a comfortable thing, but it's so worth it.
Yeah. Well, I think about one of the things that I remember him saying was that his wife said when he told her, she said, "I don't know what took you so long."
Yeah.
And can you imagine that God is up in heaven looking down on us, and when he sees us do something and take that bold step, don't you know, he looks down on us and go, "I don't know what took you so long."
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, when he said that, I was kind of thinking in my head, what, even now as part of Run for God and being a runner myself, what would my wife say if I said, "Honey, we're gonna quit everything we're doing and I'm gonna become a professional runner"? She would laugh me out of the house. But that was just, in his case, that was confirmation. That had to be so comforting.
Yeah.
To hear that, and that's just confirmation on what he was supposed to do with his life, and it turned out well for him.
Yeah, and we don't think enough, I think, sometimes about the people that are around us. I know your wife, I know my wife. They're both so supportive of whatever we do, and that is so important. And not everybody has that support behind them.
Right.
I think about Ryan and how his father allowed him to do a 15-mile run when you and I know that was a terrible idea.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a terrible idea.
Right. From a coaching standpoint, you're thinking, what were they thinking? But he saw a dream, he saw a spark in Ryan's eye, and he allowed that to come out.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to surround yourself with people who make you better, who who can see those opportunities and sparkle in your eye, and who will foster that and not squash that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. But on the other side of that, we have to take those naysayers and those people who aren't building us up. Like you said, we need to push them to the side, or don't listen to them, or whatever it takes for us to suppress that. If you don't have that positive person, be that positive person too. There's nothing that makes me feel better than to hear somebody come to me and say, you helped me decide to do this. You helped me get through this. Or one of my favorite things I do is as a pacer for marathons. Mm-hmm. I've done that a few times, and just knowing that you've helped somebody reach their goal it means more to me than winning a race.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's why we always tell instructors out there, or coaches that are teaching the 5K challenge, you're going to change a lot of lives, but your life's going to be changed too.
Yep.
Because when you learn to give back, it changes you.
Yeah.
It takes the focus off of how fast can I get as a runner, and it puts it on how can I help those around me to reach their goals and become better people. Now, with that said, we all need that realist in our life.
We do.
Otherwise, we'd all be broke and homeless. And because I've had some crazy ideas before. My wife has had to say, now, wait a minute, Mitchell. Let's think about this. And so we all have to have that person in our life who will reel us back in. So we don't just need all optimists around us.
That is true.
But we need to choose our voice of reasons very carefully.
Well, yeah, and I think the key is that you find people that have your best interest at heart.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Because those people will be honest with you, whether that's building you up and supporting you, or saying, that don't sound like a good idea.
Yeah.
We
all need a little bit of New Jersey in our lives.
That's
sometimes.
Got to have a little of that.
Got to take a stab at the New Jersey guy here.
You list some of Dean's accomplishments, and I thought this was so telling about kind of who Dean is, because you listed several things that he had done, which were amazing accomplishments, and then said, now, which one of those is most memorable? Mm-hmm. And he talks about his running a 10K with his 10-year-old daughter on her 10th birthday.
Yeah, that shows the human side, because we're talking to a superhuman guy that's run all these insanely difficult races, but his most memorable and his favorite is a 10K with his daughter.
So awesome.
That's so awesome. That's a great story.
Yeah. And you guys go on to talk about the Badwater 135, which is, to my mind, that's got to be one of the toughest true ultramarathon races in the world. He talks about how it starts at the lowest point in the contiguous United States and finishes at the highest point. Mm-hmm. And that's insane.
It is.
But what I thought was interesting about the whole discussion was you guys talked about running through Death Valley, mm-hmm. and about how hot it was. Mm-hmm. And we can get to that and talk about some of that. But what I thought was really interesting was you never talked about that climb up Mount Whitney.
Right.
That's got to be terribly difficult, but that's not even the part we talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I was so enamored by the stories I'd read about his shoes melting. I mean, I don't care for heat. I love warm. I don't like heat like that. And to run fully clothed on top of that, I don't know if we talked about that, but you can't have exposed skin in that type of heat, because you'll just roast. So he's fully clothed. He's got a hat on. Everything's white. Mm-hmm. If you've ever seen those guys running through Death Valley. And at the time when they did this, when Dean ran these races, it was in the middle of the day when they had them coming through Death Valley. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think they actually come through Death Valley maybe at night now, because it was so dangerous to do it that way. I mean, running in 114, 120 degree heat, where your shoes are melting and you have to run on the white line, that I'm sure the insurance companies behind that race were saying, now, wait a minute, we may not be able to issue a policy for this anymore. So, but it's incredible to hear these stories. I mean, when you brush across the climb up Mount Whitney, that shows you that he's done some pretty hardcore stuff.
Yeah. He talked about there being a low of 114 degrees at night.
Yeah.
I just can't envision it being 114 degrees and it being dark outside.
And for for people who listening who don't know what Death Valley is, I'm sure we've all heard of it, but Death Valley is actually
below sea level.
Below sea level. I don't remember how many feet, maybe 80 feet below sea level. So it's a huge bowl. And if you've ever been in an area where the air is not moving in the middle of the summer, you can understand what I'm talking about. Now, magnify that by 10.
Yeah.
And that's probably what Death Valley feels like. There's no wind. There's no rain. The ground is parched. It just looks like sandpaper out around you. And it's 120 degrees sometimes, and your shoes are melting.
Yeah.
How in the world does that sound fun?
When he talked about how the actual pavement can actually get up to 200 degrees.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But it's
I
a thing.
I love smoking meat, and I smoke barbecue at 200, 225 degrees.
Yeah.
So you could cook meat on the surface that he's running on. You could fry eggs or bacon out there.
That is just crazy. And he makes the comment that, well, you talked about him winning it, and he said, well, I don't like to think of me as winning it as much as I escaped the fastest.
I survived the fastest, yeah, something like that. But that's also shows the humble side of him that, he could wave that flag, but he chooses not to.
Yeah.
Because he knows that all those other people who were out there running with him, their runs were just as impressive as his. To finish that.
Well, he mentions that the first year he tried it, he didn't finish.
Right.
I mean, he understands what it's like to struggle enough to not finish.
Right.
I mean, here's a guy who, look at all the things he's done, and he didn't finish. I think it's a good lesson for all of us, because sometimes we think these people make it look so easy, and he does, and you hear all these great accomplishments. Hey, the guy didn't finish one of the most important foot races in the world one time because he couldn't do it.
Yeah, and I think a lot about just exactly what you just said about these athletes out there who make this look so easy, and that guy won the Boston Marathon, and it just hardly looked like he was even working. Well, that's at the prime. Mm-hmm. 95% of the time, they're struggling.
Yep.
And that's a lesson for us not to look at. That's why that's the part of social media that I don't like, is because it's the highlight reels of people's lives.
Yeah.
And you start trying to compare yourself to the highlight reels of people's lives, and it can bring you down. But we all know what goes on outside those pictures.
Yeah.
It's the same struggles that we have, and it's the same with athletes. That's the danger you have of trying to compare yourself. It's the danger I have of comparing me to you.
Yeah.
I wind up with stress fractures when I try to run with you. But that's the danger in society, period, is when we start trying to compare ourselves to other people, and especially when we start trying to compare ourselves to their highlight reel. It's only going to make us
feel inadequate.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not.
Right.
We're very adequate.
And it's the Bible makes it clear.
Exactly.
Yeah. He talks about, you asked him about the Run Forrest Run. We talked about that a few minutes ago. But I never thought about it, that when he first started running, that movie wasn't out yet. And so I remember.
And that movie seems like it was forever ago.
I know. I remember at that time, because I've run the Peachtree Road Race since probably my first year was 1980, 81, something like that.
I was born in 1978, by the way, in case you're wondering.
And I remember them playing the running song at that time was the Rocky theme song. That was
really?
Gonna Fly Now. I remember that was the song, and they would play that in the middle of the Peachtree Road Race on the side of the road. Man, you get fired up because that was the running song. And then he mentioned Chariots of Fire, which, by the way, if you haven't seen the movie Chariots of Fire, it's a great movie if you're a Christian and want to see a movie about running and about being a Christian and what it means to stand up for your faith. Chariots of Fire is a good movie.
It is.
But anyway, that was the music, and those were the things that were said about runners back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember those days.
Yeah. And then you guys talked about this crazy epic adventure of running from Disneyland to New York City and being on the news every morning, and with Regis and Kathy Lee. I can't imagine getting up every morning with the knowledge that day you're going to run as far as you can, or as far as you got prescribed for that day, which is going to be 50, 60, 70 miles. And then you're going to get up the next day and do it again.
Yeah, and I think I said this, that this is not one that gets talked about a lot. When you hear about Dean Karnazes, you hear about Badlands, you hear about the road to Sparta, And this is one of the races that kind of gets glossed over. But I remember I was following it when he did that, and the cumulative effect. Yeah, in the ultramarathon world, 40 to 50 miles, 60 miles is not that big of a deal. But the cumulative effect, I've talked about the Blue Ridge Relay that I ran, and I was only running 8 or 10 miles at a time, and how the break, it's still the hardest thing I've ever done, not because of the volume of mileage, but because of the breaks. And when you run, you talked about your run the other day, you posted it on Run Club where you struggled really bad in a run, and you made the comment to me, you said the worst thing I did was stop. And your body goes into recovery mode when you stop. Things tighten up, things get sore, you get hungry, you want to eat everything in sight. But with him, he had to throttle that because the very next morning he had to get up and do it all again. Most of us, if we ran 50, 60, 70 miles, we're done for a week.
Yeah.
But he had to get it up and do it every day for 4,000 miles. And to me, that is probably the most impressive thing from the outside looking in. He may tell you it's not the hardest thing, but it's the most impressive thing to me to know, to have done something like that before, doing a relay, and you just, the last thing you want to think about when the alarm clock goes off the next morning is getting up and doing it again for days and days and days and days.
Yeah.
I don't even know the math there, but I don't even remember how long it took him. But it took a long time.
Yeah.
And mentally, that's just the mental side of that feat that he achieved had to be brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He goes from that, and then you start talking about the road to Sparta.
Isn't that fascinating?
Oh, my goodness, it's so fascinating. You know, I've grown up my whole life knowing that about the run of Phidippides, and I don't know how many people know that story, but, you know, Phidippides takes the fact that they won, and we don't even know if this story is even true, first of all. Right. But he takes the story of that they had beaten who was it? The Persians.
The Persian,
I'm sorry.
The Persian Empire.
I'm trying to get that word out of my head. The Athenians had defeated the Persians. He has to take that word back and let them know he runs about a marathon, and he says Nike, which is where Nike came from.
I never knew that.
And then he dies, and that's what we know about him. But there's so much more to that story. And one of the interesting things, and he glossed over this, and I think this is interesting, and maybe some of our folks will think this is interesting. That original run was not 26.2 miles. Mm-hmm. It was probably around 25 miles. Mm-hmm. And the first Olympic marathon was less than 26.2 miles. The reason that the distance now is 26.2 miles is an interesting story. And it's in 1908 in the London Olympics, they were supposed to lay out a course that was 25 miles long, roughly 40 kilometers. And so they did. And then they realized it didn't start and finish where they wanted it to. And so in order to make it longer, they made it 26 miles because it had to start at the palace and it had to finish at the stadium. And so, and then they wanted to make sure it finished in front of the royal box in the stadium. So they lengthened it 385 yards to get to the royal box. That's where the 26 miles, 385 yards comes from.
And it stuck.
And yeah, well, that happened then, and then a few years later, they decided that's going to be the official distance. The official distance of the marathon wasn't that until like 1912, I think it was.
Yeah.
So, interesting story. But back to the road to Sparta, it's interesting that he's 100% Greek, and he's very proud of that.
Right.
And I think that's cool to listen to somebody talk about their heritage in a way that they can appreciate it so much. Particularly, you know, the Greek people can use some help right now.
Yeah,
with where they are. And this story that he talks about takes place in 490 BC. So we're talking about 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder it's hard to find the facts on it. But originally, his first run, 153 miles as far as they can tell, to deliver a message.
And that they identified back then and this really blew me away. I kind of questioned it when I first heard it, but then you hear it explained that a runner is actually faster than a horse over distance. I mean, we think the first thing we think about is the Kentucky Derby. There's no way we can outrun those horses, but they run a mile and they're done. And to ask a horse to run that far at any kind of speed is just, it would take days.
And over the terrain that they have to run.
Right, to make that happen. If you look at all the old cowboy movies, they're walking, and they'll go 4 or 5 hours, and they have to let the horse rest. So to have a well-trained runner like this, it was faster, and I just find that fascinating that couriers back then, the mailman, we used to have walking mailmen around here where we live, but the mailman back then was a runner, and if you needed to ship it across the country, well, Phidippides here, he'll take care of that for you, and that's just that's a fact. I've never heard that. As long as I've been in this sport now, I've never heard that story, and it's fascinating. And it sounds like he had a great group of historians around him, helping him put this book together.
Yeah, and I think about back then, you're talking about, again, about 2,500 years ago, and he is doing this, eating figs and drinking water wherever he can find it. It's not like he had gel packs in his fuel belt.
Right.
He had to find this stuff on his own along the way because there was no support. It was just him.
Yeah, and figs on top of that. I was thinking when he was saying this that I think the only fig I've ever eaten is a fig Newton. I don't know if I've eaten real figs, but I kind of put them in the same category as prunes. Close.
Yeah, a little sweeter, but yeah.
But I couldn't imagine eating prunes for 150 miles. We won't get into what that causes, but it's got to be tough. And I actually heard Dean in another interview talking about when he did this, when he retraced this 153 miles as close as he could, he tried to do it eating the only things that Phidippides would have eaten, which would have been figs, and the GI issues just about brought him down.
Yeah.
So that's maybe the body was the digestive system. I'm sure it was different back then.
Yeah.
But that's.
And back then they didn't have. I know this is crazy for people to understand this, but they didn't have Google Maps back then.
Yeah.
I mean,
or even maps.
Period. It was just, hey, I think I got to go that direction.
Yeah.
And that to me is as interesting as anything. I wonder how many extra miles some of those guys ran just trying to figure out exactly which direction I need to run.
And we say it's 153 miles based on Google Maps nowadays, but we don't know how much side to side. I mean, you can cover a lot of ground going side by side and navigating, and nowadays we run point to point, but I'm sure that wasn't the case back then with the things he was having to navigate, and valleys and mountains, and so it today we look at it and we say, yeah, that's 153 miles, but it could have been more than that. We don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think about this. I think about how, so Phidippides is dispatched to run 153 miles to go talk to the Spartans and ask them if they will join them in battle against the Persians. And they say, yeah, we can do it, but we can't do it right now. We're going to have to wait 6 days. And so now he has to turn around and say, and run back and go, we're going to have to wait 6 days. And then they make the decision that we can't wait 6 days. And I'm thinking, if they thought so much that they needed that help, that they dispatched somebody to run 150 miles to ask the question if somebody would help them, and then they found out they couldn't help them right away, so they just said, you know what, I think we got enough. Let's just go for it. Mm-hmm. I think there's some lessons in that for us, in that oftentimes we think we're waiting for reinforcements. We're waiting for some help to get something done, and sometimes God just wants us to take a stand and go after it.
Right.
And I can't imagine the look on some of the guys' face in the group there who thought, okay, we're waiting to see if the Spartans are going to join us. And then they hear, okay, the Spartans are going to join us, but not right away. And they're like, okay, we can wait. This is good. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we're going without the help.
Right.
And I think that's that's got to be a tough thing to do. I imagine the adrenaline flowing through those guys at that point was pretty strong.
Yeah, and I mean the battles that they fought were so much different than battles nowadays. I mean, this was all hand-to-hand combat, and the idea of thinking of going up against the Persian Empire. I mean, there's movies written about the Persian armies, and that had to be. I mean, it was truly a David and Goliath type moment, and it's fascinating that Dean talked about, and he's talked about in other interviews, how that changed modern civilization as we know it. I mean, democracy may not have been a thing had it not been for that moment. I mean, literally the marathon could have changed human civilization for all we know. And that's a pretty cool thing to think about, when we put our sport up against other sports. How many other sports can say we changed human civilization? Well,
yeah, there's not another one that can say that.
No, you can't.
That's right. That's right.
So that's what that needs to be in one of your episodes of why running is so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to do.
We changed history.
We changed history. I like that. That is.
Listen at me. I'm saying we.
And I
didn't have anything to do with that.
We're all part of the same group. We talk about that, right?
Yeah,
how,
exactly.
One runner is kin to another.
Yeah.
It's all good.
My brother Phidippides. Nike wouldn't be here without him.
That's right. That's right. And this whole idea of running all that way, and one of the things that he doesn't talk about in this interview, but he talked about in another interview, was how he runs this 153 miles and apparently does it in less than 36 hours. Mm-hmm. And he has to stand up in front of the Spartans, and he has to convince them to join them, right? Mm-hmm. So he just got through running all this way, but now he's got to be presentable too. Mm-hmm. He can't just go, oh gosh, I'm just dying. Hey, will you guys join us? Yeah. He's got to stand up with his back straight and go, hey, we need you guys. And he's got to be animated. And I just think that whole picture is a lot like our walk with Christ, in that sometimes we're tired and sometimes it's hard. And sometimes God just wants us to forget about being tired and it being hard, and just throw our shoulders back and go, this is for you, God. Yeah. Let me be bold. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. What a great interview. We left it on the cliffhanger of asking about some of his books and some of the other things, some of the projects that he has done, and so we're gonna pick that back up next week with that. In the meantime, if you are not a Run for God coach, we wish that you would consider doing that. Being a Run for God coach is something that will change your life and the lives of those around you. So go out there and get involved with Run for God in that way. And I think you won't be sorry. And understand, this is something you can do online right now, right? So get involved. It's harder, but you can still do it.
And tell your friends about Run Club.
Absolutely.
I'm still inspired at what I see going on in the Run for God group. People are taking this to places that I never thought they would. There's so much interaction. They're loving your challenges that you're throwing up each month. The plank challenge is going on right now, and everybody's having a ball with that. We're seeing people video. Irene, if you're out there, I'm loving the videos of you. You're counting down your planks, and she's got those cool green glasses, and so I'm loving what I'm seeing out of this group. So if you're not part of this group, go to runforgod.com/run club and get signed up today.
I found out this morning that one of the very active members in our Run Club is actually, apparently, I don't know how related through marriage or whatever, to a girl that I went to high school with. And she messaged me this morning and said, I didn't know you were part of this.
Really?
It's such a small world. So, go out there and find some more and bring this world of runners closer together. Exactly. Go to runforgod.com and figure out how. In the meantime, we'll see you next week with part 2 of the Dean Karnazes interview. Until then, go out and shine your light.
Good word, Dean.
For more information about the Run for God ministry, go to runforgod.com. If you have questions about your salvation, click on the Peace with God tab. There's nothing more important. Thanks for joining us today.